Welcome to my channel where nightmares live. This is Midnight Tales.
What would you do if you found a camper's diary in the middle of the woods, and the last page warned about a tree with no shadow standing outside the tent? This is not just a story about a missing person, it is about what was waiting for them in the dark, and what still lingers in those woods. Stay with me until the very end, because once you hear the last entry, you will never look at the forest the same way again. The forest was silent when Ranger Thomas arrived. The abandoned campsite lay beneath the tall pines, a circle of ash where the fire had died. A damp breeze carried the faint smell of smoke, though the fire had been cold for days. The tent sagged inward, its zipper half open as if someone had crawled out in a hurry. That was when he saw it. A small leather diary lying in the dirt, its cover wet with dew. The first pages were filled with simple notes, dates, meals, sketches of trees. But the later entries grew frantic. Shaky handwriting. Broken sentences. Drawings of tall shapes lurking between the trunks. One line repeated again and again, "It follows me when the sun sets." Ranger Thomas turned to the last page. The ink was smeared, but the words were clear. "There is a tree outside my tent. A tree with no shadow." His breath caught. The air around the campsite felt heavier, pressing down on his chest. He raised his head, scanning the trees. The forest seemed ordinary. Pines stretching skyward, their shadows long in the dying light. But then he noticed it. At the edge of the clearing, one tree stood darker than the rest. Its trunk twisted, bark rippling like old scars. The ground beneath it was bare, untouched by shade. No shadow at all. Thomas blinked, his throat dry. The silence deepened, swallowing the sound of his breath. Somewhere in the forest, a branch snapped. And the diary slipped from his hands. The diary struck the soil with a soft thud. Thomas froze, his hand still half extended as if it were suspended in air. The snapping sound echoed again, closer this time. He forced himself to inhale slowly, but the breath trembled in his chest. The trees around him seemed to lean in, their needles whispering against one another. He stepped back, his boot crunching on the damp earth. The tree with no shadow stood perfectly still, though the wind stirred every other branch in sight. Its bark seemed darker now, as if the light itself recoiled from it. Thomas reached for his radio. The static hissed, but no voice answered. He turned the dial, trying every channel. Nothing. Only the faint whisper of dead air. The diary lay open at his feet, pages fluttering though there was no breeze. A faint scratching sound came from it, like a pencil moving across paper. But his hands were empty. The pen was gone. The words began to form by themselves. Letters carving across the page in jagged strokes, "It sees you." Thomas stumbled backward, his pulse hammering in his ears. The air smelled of iron now, thick and metallic, stinging the back of his throat. He turned his gaze back to the tree. Something moved at its base. A shape peeling away from the trunk. It was tall, impossibly thin, its outline blurred as though the forest itself rejected its presence. It stood without sound, without breath, without shadow. Thomas could not look away. The longer he stared, the more the creature's form seemed to change. A figure, human-like, yet twisted, arms too long, head tilting as if bones inside it were broken. Its skin resembled bark, but it glistened wet as though freshly peeled. The forest darkened. Not the natural fall of night, but a swallowing of light, creeping inward like a closing fist. Thomas stumbled back to the fire pit, grabbing a half-burnt log, his only weapon. His heartbeat thundered, echoing louder than his footsteps. The creature did not move. It simply watched. And then the ground beneath him shifted. The soil rippled like water, and a hollow groan rose from beneath the earth. The campsite smelled of decay, a sharp sweetness that clung to his tongue. Thomas looked down. Fingers. Rotting, soil-coated fingers pressed up through the dirt, clutching at his boots. He kicked free, stumbling backward, falling hard onto the damp grass. The diary landed beside him, its pages drenched with new ink. Fresh words scrawled across the paper in desperate handwriting, "It will not stop. It knows your name." Thomas's throat tightened. He had not written that name. And yet, there it was, carved into the page. Each letter etched deep, as though the diary itself had cut it into its skin. The creature stepped forward. No sound of leaves. No rustle of soil. Only silence. The tree behind it seemed to pulse, its bark splitting open like veins. Something black oozed from the cracks, thick and glistening, spreading across the ground. The forest no longer felt alive. It felt hollow. As if every living thing had fled, leaving him alone with it. Thomas's vision blurred. The creature's head tilted further, an impossible angle, until its face hovered inches from his. No eyes. No mouth. Only the impression of a face carved into bark. And then, faintly, he heard a voice. Not through his ears. Inside his skull. A whisper, layered, endless, speaking words that did not belong to human tongues. The sound pulled at him, dragging him deeper, drowning out his thoughts. The diary quivered on the ground, its pages turning in frantic motion, as if something inside wanted out. And Thomas realized. The missing camper had never left. Their voice was still here. Trapped in the ink. Screaming through every line. The creature leaned closer. And the forest bent with it. The world around Thomas seemed to twist as the creature leaned closer. The trees curved inward, their trunks bending unnaturally as though pulled by invisible strings. The air pressed down on his chest, suffocating, every breath a struggle. The diary snapped shut on the ground with a violent clap, as if something inside had been sealed away. Thomas scrambled backward, his palms slipping on wet moss. The creature did not advance. It simply stood there, its faceless head tilting from side to side, as though studying him. Then it raised an arm. The movement was agonizingly slow, deliberate, like a puppet string being pulled. Its long fingers stretched outward, pointing at the closed diary. The soil around the book darkened. Moisture spread in a widening circle, staining the ground until it resembled a pool of blood. A low hum vibrated in Thomas's skull. Not sound, but pressure, an unbearable weight building inside his head. He clutched his ears, but the hum only grew stronger. The forest around him flickered. One moment he saw trees, shadows, mist. The next, he saw tents torn open, sleeping bags shredded, footprints circling the camp in tangled spirals. The missing camper's voice bled into his mind. A hoarse whisper, panicked, repeating the same phrase, "Do not look at its face, do not look at its face." Thomas forced his eyes downward, staring at the moss beneath his boots. But curiosity gnawed at him. He could feel its faceless gaze pressing on him like a hand against his skin. A second voice joined the first. Deeper. Calm. It came from the creature. "You read. Now you see. Now you stay." The words rattled his bones, though the forest remained silent. Thomas's hands trembled as he reached for the diary. He did not know why. Perhaps instinct. Perhaps compulsion. The moment his fingers touched the cover, the hum ceased. The forest grew still. Every branch. Every leaf. Every breath of wind frozen in place. Thomas opened the book. The pages were no longer white. They were black, as if ink had flooded the paper. But words glowed faintly against the darkness. Not written. Carved. His own name repeated across every page, over and over, as though the book had known him long before he arrived. The creature lowered its arm. It stepped closer. Thomas felt the ground quake with each movement, though its legs made no sound upon the soil. The diary grew heavier in his hands, pulling at his arms as though it were made of stone. The carved letters shifted, rearranging themselves into new sentences. The shadowless tree is the gate. You opened it. You are chosen. Thomas's throat closed. The diary grew hotter, searing his palms, but he could not drop it. It clung to him, as if fused to his skin. The creature loomed over him now. Its faceless head bent low, almost brushing his hair. Thomas's eyes burned. Every instinct screamed to run, but his legs refused to move. The ground at the base of the tree split open with a wet tearing sound. Roots writhed like serpents, thrashing and curling, coated in black slime. The opening widened, revealing not soil, not rock, but a void. A pit that seemed endless, darker than night. From within came whispers. Hundreds of voices. Some pleading. Some screaming. Some chanting words in languages he could not understand. The missing camper's voice rose above the rest, shrill and broken. It does not let you leave. It only takes you in. Thomas's vision blurred as the roots slithered closer, wrapping around his ankles. The diary pulsed against his chest like a second heart. The creature leaned closer still, its bark skin glistening, its faceless visage almost touching his. Thomas wanted to scream, but no sound left his mouth. And then, the void beneath the tree began to pull. The earth itself dragged at him. Every muscle strained as he clutched at the ground, his nails splitting against stone. The voices grew louder. The creature's whisper drilled into his mind, "You stay." The diary fell open one last time. And on the page, his own handwriting appeared. Shaky. Desperate. A final entry forming before his eyes: "There is a tree outside my tent. A tree with no shadow." Thomas stared at the words bleeding across the page. They were his words. His handwriting. But he had not written them. His heart pounded like a drum in his chest as the ink thickened, dripping down the paper like tar. The roots coiled tighter around his legs, pulling him closer to the void beneath the tree. The forest no longer resembled a forest. The pines around the clearing warped and bent, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal arms. The stars above flickered and dimmed, swallowed by an unnatural dusk. The voices rose in volume, a storm of whispers filling every corner of his mind. Some spoke his name with longing. Others howled with rage. And some begged him to trade places with them. Thomas dug his nails into the moss, tearing clumps of soil as he resisted the pull. But the tree had decided. The tree had chosen. The creature loomed above him, motionless, its faceless head tilted as though savoring the moment. Thomas forced his eyes downward, away from it, clinging to the one warning that still echoed in his skull: "Do not look at its face." But the pull of curiosity was relentless. He felt it gnawing at his sanity, urging him to raise his gaze. His muscles shook. The diary slipped from his grasp and landed open beside him, its pages fluttering though there was no wind. A new entry was writing itself, the letters carved deep into the blackened paper. "Once you see its true face, you belong to it forever." Thomas's breath came in ragged gasps. The roots dragged him inches closer to the gaping void beneath the tree. The stench of rot poured from it, thick and suffocating, making his stomach churn. He could see shapes shifting in the blackness below, pale faces, twisted arms, hollow eyes reaching upward like drowning victims clawing for air. Their mouths opened in silent screams, their voices trapped in the endless whisper that filled the clearing. One face pressed higher than the rest, breaking through the slime-coated roots. It was the camper. The missing man. His features were distorted, his skin mottled and gray, but his eyes burned with a desperate recognition. The man's mouth opened, but the voice did not come from his lips. It burst directly inside Thomas's mind. "Do not let it write your name again. Tear the book. Burn it." Thomas's eyes snapped to the diary. The pages still bled words, filling faster than he could read. Sentences forming, dissolving, reforming, as though the book were alive. And there it was, his name again, etched deeper, darker, spreading across the paper like veins. Thomas clawed for it, his fingers shaking as he tried to rip the pages free. The paper did not tear. It writhed. It writhed like flesh. A scream tore from his throat as the diary pulsed against his hands, veins rising beneath the leather cover. The creature's head tilted lower, its faceless visage hovering above the book. Thomas shut his eyes tight, refusing to look. But the pressure inside his skull grew unbearable, as though unseen hands were prying his eyelids open. He felt warm blood trickling from his nose, his ears. The forest around him vibrated with a low, droning hum. The tree groaned, its bark splitting wider, releasing a river of black ichor that slithered toward him. The ground buckled. Roots whipped across the clearing, smashing stones, tearing through soil. The void widened, yawning open like a mouth eager to swallow him whole. Thomas screamed, shoving the diary into the fire pit. The damp ash hissed as the book struck it, but no flame came. Instead, the fire pit roared to life with black fire, tongues of shadow licking the air, consuming light itself. The diary burned. And yet it did not burn. The pages screamed as they turned to ash, voices crying out in agony, echoing through the clearing. The camper's voice among them. Begging. Accusing. Cursing. The creature shuddered, its body rippling like water disturbed by a stone. For the first time, it moved. Not slow. Not deliberate. But sudden. Violent. It lunged toward the fire pit, its faceless head twisting, stretching, splitting. Thomas could not stop himself. He looked. And in that instant, he saw its true face. And the forest collapsed around him. The forest collapsed like paper crumpling in on itself. Trees bent backward, snapping with deafening cracks, their splinters dissolving into black ash before they hit the ground. The earth beneath Thomas gave way, crumbling into fragments that spun into the void yawning around him. There was no sky. No ground. Only the endless roar of the abyss, pulling everything inward. And at the center of it, the creature stood unchanged. Thomas's eyes locked on its true face, though every nerve in his body screamed to look away. It was not a face. It was a void within a void. An opening of shifting flesh and shadow, swirling with countless eyes that opened and closed without order, mouths that screamed silently before vanishing into folds of darkness. Every time Thomas blinked, the face changed. A child's face. An old man's face. A deer's skull. A mirror of his own reflection, only wrong, only grinning. Each glimpse seared into his mind like brands, until his thoughts no longer felt like his own. The whispers rose, no longer distant. They were inside him. Filling his chest, clawing at his lungs, burrowing beneath his skin. He screamed, but the sound was swallowed before it left his throat. The void beneath the shadowless tree widened, pulling harder, dragging him toward the edge. The roots lashed around his arms and legs, binding him as though the forest itself had chosen to deliver him. The diary, now half ash, half flesh, rose from the black fire. Its pages flapped wildly, scattering embers of shadow into the air. The words burned across its cover, "You saw. You stay." Thomas's mind fractured. Images that were not his own exploded inside his skull, endless nights of screaming faces, hands clawing at dirt, the inside of the shadowless tree where countless bodies hung like fruit, their eyes open, their mouths frozen in silence. The missing camper's face appeared again. This time clearer. He was bound within the void, his body twisted at impossible angles. He spoke directly into Thomas's head, his voice a jagged shriek, "You should have never looked. Now you belong to it, like the rest of us." Thomas thrashed against the roots, his throat raw, his muscles straining. But each movement only dragged him closer to the tree's gaping wound. The ground around him no longer felt like soil. It pulsed, alive, veins of black ichor running beneath its surface. And beneath the pulsing came a heartbeat. Slow. Steady. Inhuman. The heartbeat of the tree itself. The creature tilted its faceless head once more. And with that subtle motion, the world obeyed. The roots heaved, yanking Thomas toward the opening. His fingernails clawed deep furrows into the earth, tearing away skin, but nothing stopped the pull. His body slid to the very edge of the void. The stench of rot and iron filled his lungs, suffocating him, making him gag. Below, faces waited. Dozens. Hundreds. All screaming without sound, their mouths open wide, their eyes begging for release. Some had skin stripped raw. Some had tree roots piercing through their skulls. Some were nothing but shadows shaped like people. And in that endless writhing mass, he saw himself. Another Thomas. Already trapped. Already screaming. The duplicate reached upward with shredded fingers, trying to pull him down. His own voice echoed from the pit, "You were always meant to be here." The roots jerked again. His legs dangled over the edge. The diary slammed against his chest as if thrown by invisible hands. It forced itself open, the pages snapping wide. New words carved into the paper, bleeding bright like fresh wounds. Final entry. Thomas's heart hammered. The voices reached a crescendo, deafening, unbearable. And then the tree's heartbeat stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the whispers. The world hung still, frozen in blackness. And the creature stepped into the void with him. The creature's movement was slow, deliberate, as though time itself bowed to its presence. Its faceless head leaned close, so close Thomas felt the weight of its emptiness pressing against his skin. The diary pulsed against his chest one last time, the pages turning on their own. The words etched themselves in strokes so deep they cut through paper, through flesh, through him. The story is written. The story is you. The roots surged upward, wrapping around his torso, forcing his arms open as though offering him to the void. Thomas tried to scream, but the sound never left his throat. Instead, the voices screamed for him. 1,000 overlapping cries, rising in unison, filling the endless black. And then silence. The void closed like an eye, swallowing both him and the creature in a single blink. The clearing was empty. The fire pit smoldered quietly, its ash cold, as though it had not burned in years. The diary lay half buried in the dirt, its leather cover cracked and brittle, no pages inside. Weeks later, another ranger followed the trail into the forest. He found the abandoned campsite, the sagging tent, the circle of ash. And there, half hidden beneath moss, he saw it. A small, weathered book. He picked it up, brushing away the dirt. The cover creaked as it opened. The first page was blank. The second page bore shaky handwriting. A single line repeated again and again. "There is a tree outside my tent. A tree with no shadow.